Kia ora team, I'm Azriel Taylor. I'm a journalist here at MediaWorks News. I had the pleasure of speaking with opposition leader Chris Hipkins on the Duncan Garner podcast. It's a year until the next election. It's over halfway into this government's term, so we talked about inflation, cost of living, rates increases, and so much more.
Are we paying these people to front up, or are we paying them to fly to Wellington to eat their lunch? Should you really lose your career for refusing to take part in a 90-minute lesson about Māori culture? This government doesn't actually have any idea how to get economic growth. Show us what you made of, Prime Minister.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Thank you so much for coming in, Chris. I really appreciate your time.
No worries, great to be here.
So we'll start with some current topics. The government revised and reversed the requirement for vapes to have removable batteries. That's a change that your government brought in. Do you have any concerns about that change?
I do, and look, I'm not saying that we got everything absolutely perfect there, but what we were trying to do is get disposable vapes out of the market. We know that for younger potential vapers, that's the way they get into it. You know, they're buying those cheap disposable vapes. It's hooking in a whole new generation potentially of vape smokers, and we don't want that as a country. Vaping has a place as a smoking cessation tool, but it shouldn't be hooking in a whole new generation of smokers.
One thing that was brought up, speaking to a professor of population health, was the concern around waste. The fact that now vapes don't have those removable packs, that those are going into landfill, etc. Is that also another aspect of those concerns?
Oh, look, I think we've always got to look at how we can minimise waste, but our first and foremost objective here has to be to not have young people taking up vaping. So I think we need to do more. I think removing disposable vapes was a first step. We've now got to look at the supply of vapes. Vape shops are popping up all over the place, often close to schools, you know, in areas where they're very accessible to young people. I think we've got more work to do as a country to stop the proliferation of vape.
Cost of living, that's been a big one recently. We've seen the headlines about Fonterra, Nicola Willis going to have a chat with the bosses. Is the government doing its job on this in this space?
The current government promised to fix the cost of living. That was what getting back on track was supposed to be all about. The cost of living crisis is worse for a lot of Kiwi families. They haven't fixed it. They've made things worse. If you're a household struggling to pay your bills, and there's a lot of middle New Zealand households in this category, they're struggling to pay their bills at the moment because everything is being squeezed. They're looking at this current government going, you haven't done the thing that you said you were going to do. You said you were going to ease the pressure on us, and that pressure's getting worse. Their family boost policy is a complete flop. 153 families have benefited from the full amount from the childcare rebate that they proposed. They said that every family with a couple of kids was going to get $250 a fortnight. Not one family has received that. I think, you know, the government has to do more. And at the moment, their answer seems to be just to shout at everybody. They need to actually start taking action to deliver on what they promised.
The government's line to that kind of argument, though, is we've had a series of OCR cuts. Inflation is back within the target band despite a recent increase. They point to all these economic figures that seem to be showing that they look to be doing their job. What's your argument to those kind of tangible measures like the OCR, like inflation?
The cuts to the official cash rate were going to happen regardless of what this government did. The Reserve Bank were bringing down inflation through having high interest rates. As that inflation came down, the official cash rate was going to come down. That was going to happen regardless of what the government did. What the government instead have done with their spending cuts is actually slow the whole economy down more than it needed to be. Take building and construction. 17,000 fewer people working in building and construction today than there were on election day. And one of the big drivers of that has been the government stopping all of its building and construction work. We didn't need to do that to bring inflation back down. Now, if you look at what's driving inflation, inflation's going back up again now. And why is that? Well, one of the big things driving inflation up are the prices that the government does control. So the increased price of public transport, every time you get on a bus or a train, that cost is going up, and that's being driven by the government. There's other areas, rates, council rates. One of the reasons council rates are going up is because the government said you've got to fix your water infrastructure and you've got to pay for it through rates. Well, if the councils have got no other choice than to hike up the rates to pay for water, that's what they're going to do.
And on local government, that has been huge. Local government NZ's had their big conference in Christchurch. Politicians from all stripes have gone down to share their concerns, their thoughts. How can we be supporting them to lower those rates, to lower that pressure on residents?
Well, nobody wants to see council rates increasing in the way that they are at the moment. But I think government blaming them for the fact that they're having to put rates up when the government is actually one of the things that's driving up rates, I think is pretty unfair on those councils. Let's be clear, we've got a huge infrastructure deficit. Our water pipes that we rely on every day are not in the shape that we need them to be in if we're going to have reliable water. If we're going to flush the toilet and know that that's not going to end up in raw sewage in the ocean, then we've actually got to do more. Councils have got to pay for that. So if the government don't want them to hike up the rates, the government needs to come to the party and say, this is how we're going to pay for the water infrastructure instead.
The line that the coalition often uses is, look, this is what Labour did. That's the line, right? We always hear it in Parliament. Every answer to oral question is, we inherited this problem. Yep. And so, at what point does Labour look back on their terms and also say, we contributed to this?
We didn't get everything right as a government, and I'd never stand here and say that we did. But the current government work on the basis that if they just keep repeating the lie often enough that, everything was Labour's fault, that people will believe it. The reality here is inflation around the world went up following the global pandemic. In the UK, inflation went over 10%. Here in New Zealand, it got to about 7.4% and then started to come down again. Inflation was already dropping before the election. It wasn't dropping fast enough for my liking. It would have been much better for me politically if it had dropped a lot faster. But inflation was already coming down before the election. That global spike in inflation wasn't something that the New Zealand government and that we and that I as Prime Minister could have controlled.
And so how would you characterise the relationship between the current government and local councils? Because often it is described as quote unquote punching down. Would you say that's accurate? I
think the current government are tying councils' hands behind their back and then taking swings at them. It's not a fair fight. Ultimately the councils are doing what they're doing around rates because they have to pay for the roads, for the water, for the rubbish disposal. That money's got to come from somewhere.
Moving to the climate, today the 2025 monitoring report shows that there are significant risks to achieving the second emissions budget, and current plans are insufficient to meet the third. In your eyes and of the Labour Party, what's going wrong?
Well, the current government talk a big game on climate change, and yet they've dialed back every initiative that was actually contributing to reducing New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions. We've got to take climate change seriously. Climate change is a cost of living issue. One of the things that's driving up the price of things in New Zealand at the moment is the lack of action on climate change. If we were fully embracing renewable energy, for example, renewable energy is cheaper. We could have lower power prices if we sorted out our electricity market. That would ease the cost of living for New Zealanders and tackle climate change at the same time.
And so is that a hint towards something that Labour would look to bring to the next election to tackle that?
Renewable energy will be a big focus for us heading into the next election campaign. New Zealand could have lower electricity prices. That would help households with the cost of living, but it would also make us more economically competitive with other countries, because businesses at the moment who are relocating offshore, shutting down their manufacturing in New Zealand, would suddenly see New Zealand as a really attractive place to be doing business.
To give the government a voice, they often, hail about the economy, the fact that we don't have enough of these minerals that they claim that we'll be getting from opening exploration again, and that some of the previous climate policies that we've had have shut down the economy. What do you make of that kind of argument for their current policies, and what balance do we strike in between those two?
Well, if you take oil and gas exploration, for example, they're proposing to take $200 million of all of our money and use that to drill for oil and gas, when we've spent, or business have spent billions of dollars in the last 20 years doing exactly that and haven't found any commercially viable discoveries. So basically they're pouring $200 million of all of our money down a well, and they're probably not going to find anything. So if we spent that on making sure that our electricity market was fixed, bringing more renewable energy on stream, we could have lower power prices. Oil and gas are not going to give us lower power prices.
The International Court of Justice released an advisory opinion. They pretty much said that countries have responsibility to reduce emissions, that countries can sue each other for their failure to live up to those responsibilities. How do you assess that change in the global scheme of things?
So I haven't had a chance to digest that ruling yet. I think it is something that we need to take our time to read through carefully and kind of understand what that means. But if we look at our Pacific neighbours, this is a very real issue for them. The decisions that we take around tackling climate change or not tackling climate change literally has life and death consequences for them. In some of those countries, if we don't really get on top of climate change quickly, their countries will disappear. So this is about whether they're going to have a future or not. So I understand why that ICJ ruling is very, very important for them.
And to the voting changes that were brought in by the government, they have scrapped same-day enrolment. They have scrapped prisoner voting as well, with big moves in that space. What are the concerns that you have?
The biggest concern I have is that they are potentially invalidating hundreds of thousands of votes. So there are hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who showed up at a polling booth at the last election, whether it was during the advance voting period or on the day, to find that their enrolment was not up to date, that they weren't on the roll. They filled in an enrolment form and voted, and their vote counted. The changes that the government are proposing suggest that many of those votes won't count. I think that is going to disenfranchise potentially hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders and mean that their votes won't count. And I just think that's totally unacceptable. One of the first duties of a government in a democracy is to make sure everyone can vote and everyone's vote counts.
David Seymour, following those changes, called late enrollers dropkicks, quote unquote. What do you make of that kind of sentiment?
I think that's David Seymour basically saying that he doesn't care about the votes of people who might disagree with him. In a democracy, you have to care about every vote. I care about making sure every New Zealander gets the chance to vote, including the people who are going to vote against me, because it's not a democracy if you don't.
And one of the big changes was that prisoner voting. Do you believe that prisoners who are being released, say, in 1 to 2 years, even 3, get to have a say in the world that they'll come out into?
Look, it's not my number one issue, but I don't support the changes that the government are making.
And moving to across the world, France has promised to recognise a Palestinian state. That is quite a major shift, a nation of that kind of stature coming out and saying that at the UN. Would Labour back New Zealand doing this? Yes.
I think it's time to recognise the Palestinian state. We've talked about wanting a two-state solution for a long time. We can do that now. We can basically say we recognise the diplomatic credentials from Palestine, and it's a relatively simple process. And I think it would send a powerful message as a country that we do believe in a two-state solution.
What can the current government be doing to help improve the situation at the moment? At the moment, we've got 1 in 5 children being in a state of malnourishment in Gaza, and we keep repeating statements and claims and joining letters. Is there anything that you would perhaps advise the government to be doing?
The government have finally started to impose sanctions on Israel for their illegal activities in the West Bank, and I think that they should do more of that. I think, we're only a small country, but it sends a powerful message of principle that what Israel is doing is wrong. Starvation should not be used as a weapon in a war. It is just wrong what Israel's doing. And I think the New Zealand government can do more. It is admittedly sending messages and expressing values. We're not going to militarily be able to go over there and solve the problem, but we can be principled. We can stand up for the values that matter to New Zealanders.
And just back to within our shores, another recent change, Sport NZ has stopped work on the inclusion of transgender people in community sport. The government believes that Sport NZ has no role dictating and speaking about gender within community sport. What do you make of that change?
Well, I don't think that central government has a role in dictating to sporting bodies how they should conduct their sporting codes. I think they should set their own rules. I think issues around transgender inclusion are best determined by sporting bodies. Where there are issues around how you make sure that sporting competition continues to be fair, those are best navigated by the sporting codes themselves.
And do you think that it's almost dangerous wading into those kind of arguments that we have? Because there are culture wars going on across the world around these kind of things, particularly in America. Would you say that we're importing that?
Well, this government have been tanking the economy, so I think they'd far rather talk about culture wars than talk about the damage that they're doing to New Zealanders' standards of living. They promised to fix the cost of living crisis and they've made it worse. And so now they're trying to distract from that by picking culture wars on issues around transgender involvement in sports. The reality here is I think New Zealanders want to see them focused on the stuff that really is mattering to every individual household on a daily basis, which is the cost of living.
Of course, the general election is approaching. It's still a wee way off, but what is Labour doing in the build-up to that?
Well, we've set out our clear priorities for the next election campaign: jobs, health, homes, re-election on the cost of living. I think one of the key messages that I got from voters at the last election campaign was that they didn't think that we as a government were focused on the issues that really mattered to them right here and right now. So next election, my message very clearly back to them is, we've heard you. We understand that that's what you want us focused on. So in the next election, as you see us rolling out our policy, it will be in those core areas: jobs, health, homes, cost of living. But it will also be about the future. It will be about saying, in all of those areas, we think we need to make some big decisions as a country that's going to put us on a better pathway, so that when my kids grow up, they're not going to join the exodus that leaves to Australia every year.
And we're in a period in the electoral cycle where the government is being heavily criticised for a lot of its moves, but no real tangible alternatives are offered from the opposition parties. And I suppose a lot of Kiwis, like you mentioned, struggling with the cost of living, seeing their rates increase, or struggling to buy butter. I suppose they'll be thinking, what actually is next for this country? So at what point does Labour start putting things on the table and say, here's what we're going to offer you?
Of course, the current government want to distract from their own failings by attacking the opposition, and they want us to release more policies so they've got more things that they can attack us about, to, again, distract from the fact that they're not coming up with answers. As leader of the opposition, nothing I say in the next 18 months has the potential to make a tangible difference to the day-to-day lives of New Zealanders. As government, every single day, Christopher Luxon wakes up and has the potential to make decisions that will change the lives of New Zealanders. He's more interested in talking about the opposition. We can't do anything for the next 18 months until the next election. He can. So rather than attacking the opposition, surely he should be focusing his attention on doing the job that he was elected to do. He said he was going to fix the cost of living, and he's not.
And on that matter of rates, and particularly local government, the matter of rates capping has come up yet again. It's something we always talk about. Is that something Labour's willing to explore?
I'm very open to a discussion around rates capping, but it has to be accompanied by a realistic analysis of what local government needs to spend over the next few years to deal with the infrastructure issues that they've got, and a realistic conversation about how we pay for that. I don't think we can pay for all of that through rates. So I think a rates cap conversation is a useful conversation to have. But if we put a cap on the rates, we've then got to go to councils and say, and we're going to pay for the other stuff that you need to do through these other means. And if we can't do that, all we're doing is just making the problem worse. It means that our water pipes are going to get worse. It means potentially one day you'll turn on the tap and you won't have drinkable water coming out of it.
Just lastly, what's your message to New Zealanders in the current day and the struggles they're facing?
It's a really tough environment for New Zealanders at the moment, and I know that a lot of Kiwi families, particularly those on low incomes, but also those in the middle, are just finding it harder and harder each day at the moment. My message to them is it doesn't have to be this way. We can be a fantastic country. This is still the best place in the world to live as far as I'm concerned, but it can be better. We can deal with some of these underlying issues if we make good decisions now. But we're not going to get there through the politics of blame, just pointing the finger at each other and saying this is all your fault. The reality is it's taken us 40 years to get to the position we're in now. We need to just park up the blame, park up the personal insults, which this government seemed to master in, and get on with fixing the problem.
Chris Hipkins, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.